There's something that happens every spring that most gardeners never notice. The hummingbirds come back. After months of migration, traveling hundreds, sometimes thousands of miles from Central America back through the southern United States, up through the Midwest, all the way into the gardens of the Pacific Northwest and New England, they come back. Tired, hungry, running on almost nothing. And in those first critical hours after landing, they do something remarkable. They don't wander randomly. They don't stop at just any flower. They scan, using eyesight so precise they can detect colors in the ultraviolet spectrum that you and I literally cannot see. And they target specific plants with almost surgical accuracy. Now here's where it gets uncomfortable. Research shows that once a hummingbird identifies your garden as a reliable nectar source, it will return to that exact location season after season, sometimes for years. It becomes part of their migration memory. But the opposite is also true. If your garden doesn't meet the threshold, wrong plants, wrong bloom timing, not enough nectar density, they register it as a dead zone. And they stop coming. Not just this season. Possibly for good. So today's video isn't just a plant list. It's a rescue plan for your garden, and honestly, for the hummingbirds that should be visiting it. Welcome to Evergreen Garden Life. If you are new here, please take a second right now and hit that like button. Share this video with a fellow gardener who needs to hear this, and subscribe to the channel. 13 Perennials. Counted down from least to most powerful. And by number 1, you'll understand exactly why some gardens become legendary hummingbird destinations, and others stay silent all summer long. Let's get into it. Number 13, Catmint, Nepeta racemosa. Now I know what some of you are thinking. Catmint? Really? That's your opener? Stick with me here. Because catmint is one of those plants that gardeners constantly underestimate. And hummingbirds absolutely do not. Catmint blooms in late spring, right around the time the first hummingbirds are arriving from migration. And that timing matters more than most people realize. Think about it. These birds have just completed one of the most physically demanding journeys in the animal kingdom. They are showing up to your garden running on fumes. And the first plant that offers them a reliable nectar source in that window, that plant gets remembered. That plant gets locked into their mental map. Catmint is that plant. It produces these long, lavender blue flower spikes absolutely loaded with small tubular blooms. And hummingbirds can work an entire catmint plant methodically, moving from spike to spike, for several minutes at a time. It's also incredibly hardy. We're talking drought-tolerant, deer-resistant, grows in zones 3 through 8, thrives in full sun, and if you cut it back after the first flush of blooms, it will rebloom again later in the season. That's 2 feeding windows from one plant. For a number 13, that's not bad at all. Number 12, Agastache hyssop. Agastache is a plant that looks like it was specifically designed with hummingbirds in mind. And honestly, in some ways, it kind of was. The flower structure is tubular, which already puts it in the hummingbird's preferred category. But what makes Agastache special is the nectar volume. These blooms produce nectar consistently and generously across an unusually long bloom period. We're talking midsummer all the way through early fall in most climates. That's not a small window. That's months of reliable feeding. There's also the color factor. Agastache typically blooms in shades of orange, coral, pink, and purple, all sitting in the warm spectrum that hummingbirds are neurologically drawn to. Remember what we said earlier about their ultraviolet vision? Agastache practically glows to them in a way that we can't fully appreciate with our own eyes. And here's something most gardeners don't know. Agastache is also highly attractive to bees and butterflies, which means planting it creates this layered ecological moment in your garden where multiple species are feeding at once. It becomes a living, buzzing, humming ecosystem. In a single bed. Drought-tolerant. Heat-tolerant. Grows in zones 5 through 10 depending on the variety. And incredibly low maintenance once established. Don't sleep on Agastache. Number 11, Lupin lupinus. Lupin is one of those plants that stops people in their tracks. Tall, dramatic spires of color rising up out of the garden in late spring. Purples, pinks, whites, reds, bicolors. It's genuinely one of the most visually stunning perennials you can grow. But hummingbirds aren't stopping for the aesthetics. They're stopping because lupin blooms at a critical time. That same late spring, early migration window we talked about with catmint. And the flower structure, while not classically tubular, still provides enough accessible nectar to make it worth a visit. Here's the thing about lupin that most gardeners don't fully appreciate. It's a nitrogen fixer. That means it actually improves the soil it's growing in, feeding the surrounding plants through its root system. So not only are you adding a hummingbird attractor to your garden, you're improving the long-term health of everything planted near it. Lupin does best in cooler climates, zones 4 through 8, and it prefers well-drained, slightly acidic soil. It can be a little temperamental in hot, humid summers, but in the right conditions it naturalizes beautifully and comes back stronger every year. Plant it toward the back of a border where those tall spires can really make a statement. The hummingbirds will find it. They always do. Number 10. Penstemon beardtongue. If you have never grown penstemon, I genuinely feel a little sorry for you. Not in a mean way. In a you have no idea what you've been missing way. Penstemon is arguably the most hummingbird-optimized native perennial in North America. The flowers are tubular, perfectly, almost mathematically tubular, in exactly the diameter that fits a hummingbird's bill. The nectar is produced deep inside the flower, which means insects have a much harder time accessing it, so it's essentially preserved for the birds. And the color range, scarlet, coral, purple, pink, sits right in the visual sweet spot for hummingbird attraction. There are hundreds of penstemon species native to North America, which means no matter where you garden, there's likely a variety that's specifically adapted to your local climate and soil. That's a huge advantage. Native plants don't just survive, they thrive with less water, less fertilizer, less effort. And they support local wildlife in ways that non-native species simply can't replicate. Penstemon blooms from late spring through summer, and if the conditions are right, some varieties will push out a second flush of blooms in early fall. That extended season makes it one of the most valuable plants on this entire list in terms of raw feeding opportunity for migrating birds. Plant it in full sun with excellent drainage, and then mostly leave it alone. It doesn't want to be fussed over. It just wants to do its thing. And what it does is attract hummingbirds like almost nothing else. Hey, real quick. I want to pause here for just a second. Because if you're still watching, you clearly care about your garden. You care about doing this right. And I want to make sure you don't miss what's coming, because the plants from number 9 downward? That's where things get really serious. If you haven't subscribed yet, I need you to think about something. Every week, people who aren't subscribed to this channel miss videos exactly like this one. And they go another season with a garden that should be alive with hummingbirds, and isn't. That's not a small thing. These birds are declining in parts of their range. Habitat loss, pesticide use, climate shifts affecting bloom timing, it's all real. And the gardens of people like you and me? They matter more than most people realize. So if you care, really care, hit subscribe right now. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss a video. Because the information in this channel could genuinely make a difference. Not just for your garden, for the birds that depend on it. Don't let another season pass with your garden flying under the radar. Let's keep going. Number 9. Salvia, perennial varieties. Okay, now we're getting into the serious territory. Salvia is, and I want to be careful here because I don't want to overstate this, one of the single most important plant genera for hummingbird gardening in North America. Possibly the most important. We'll get to the top of the list and you'll see why I'm hedging. But salvia belongs in almost every hummingbird garden on the continent. The tubular flower structure is nearly perfect for hummingbird feeding. The color range, especially the deep reds and electric blues, is precisely what hummingbirds are scanning for when they arrive in a new area. And perennial salvias, as opposed to the annual varieties you find at garden centers in spring, come back year after year, which means they become a permanent, reliable landmark in your garden's hummingbird ecosystem. Some standout perennial varieties to look for. Black and blue salvia is extraordinary. Stunning dark blue flowers on nearly black stems, blooms from summer through frost, and hummingbirds absolutely mob it. Salvia garannitica, sometimes called anise-scented sage, is similarly aggressive in its hummingbird attraction. And for warmer climates, Salvia gregii, autumn sage, is a nearly year-round nectar machine in zones 6 and above. The key with perennial salvia is placement and soil. Full sun, well-drained soil, and a little patience in the first year while the root system establishes. By year 2 you'll barely need to look at it. It just blooms, and the hummingbirds come. Number 8. Crocosmia. Here's one that surprises people every single time. Crocosmia is a South African native that has found a remarkably enthusiastic audience in North American gardens, and among North American hummingbirds. The flowers are arching, sword-like stems lined with small, bright orange or red tubular blooms that look almost like a trail of flames curving through your garden. It's dramatic, it's architectural, and it is absolutely irresistible to hummingbirds. Crocosmia blooms in midsummer, which is important because it fills a window that some other perennials on this list don't cover. The peak of summer can actually be a leaner time for hummingbirds in some gardens. The spring bloomers are done and the fall bloomers haven't started yet. Crocosmia bridges that gap. It shows up exactly when it's needed and delivers nectar right through the hottest weeks of the year. One thing to be aware of, in warmer climates, zones 6 and above, Crocosmia can spread aggressively. Some gardeners love this because it fills space quickly and creates dramatic drifts of color. Others find it a little too enthusiastic. Know your space before you plant it, and give it room. In cooler climates, zones 5 and below, treat the corms like dahlias, dig them up before frost and store them over winter. But if you're in the right zone and you give it the space it wants, Crocosmia will reward you with one of the most visually striking and ecologically productive midsummer displays you've ever grown. Number 7. Coral bells, Heuchera. Now this one comes with a small asterisk, and I want to be upfront about that. Heuchera, coral bells, is primarily known as a foliage plant. The leaves come in this extraordinary range of colors: burgundy, caramel, lime green, near black, silver. And most gardeners grow it purely for the visual texture it adds to shady borders and containers. The flowers are almost an afterthought for a lot of people. But hummingbirds disagree. When coral bells sends up those tall, airy flower stems in late spring and early summer, covered in tiny tubular bell-shaped flowers, usually in shades of coral, pink, red or white, hummingbirds notice immediately. The flowers are small, but they're accessible, they're nectar-rich, and they bloom during that important early season window when the birds need every calorie they can find. The real advantage of Heuchera in a hummingbird garden is its versatility. It grows in partial to full shade, which means you can attract hummingbirds to corners of your garden that most nectar plants simply can't reach. Under trees, along shaded fence lines, in north-facing beds, coral bells brings hummingbird activity to spaces that would otherwise be dark and underutilized. It's also exceptionally long-lived and low-maintenance once established. Divide it every few years to keep it vigorous, give it decent drainage, and it will come back reliably season after season. Think of Heuchera as your secret weapon for shaded spaces. And stop ignoring those flowers. Number 6. Nephophia Red Hot Poker. I'll be completely honest with you. The first time I saw red hot poker in a garden, I thought it was almost too dramatic. Too bold. Like someone had stuck a lit torch in the flower bed. And then a hummingbird appeared, hovering at the very tip of that glowing orange and yellow spike. And I completely changed my opinion. Nephophia is a statement plant. The flower spikes rise up on tall, strong stems, and they're tiered, red or orange at the top fading to yellow at the base. And that gradient creates this almost beacon-like signal that hummingbirds can apparently detect from impressive distances. The tubular florets open progressively from the bottom of the spike upward, which means the plant essentially offers a rolling buffet of fresh nectar over an extended period. A single spike can be actively producing nectar for weeks. Red hot poker blooms from late spring through fall depending on the variety, and if you choose your varieties carefully, you can have Nephophia in bloom across that entire window. The early varieties hit that spring migration window. The late varieties carry right through into fall migration. For a single genus, that's remarkable seasonal coverage. It prefers full sun and well-drained soil. It will not tolerate wet feet over winter, but in the right conditions it's surprisingly tough. Deer tend to leave it alone. It handles drought reasonably well once established, and it comes back every year with more vigor. Plant it somewhere it can be seen from a distance. Not just for the hummingbirds. For you. It deserves to be appreciated. Number 5. Foxglove digitalis. Foxglove occupies this fascinating ecological space where it sits at the intersection of wildness and cultivation. You see it growing along roadsides in the Pacific Northwest, spilling down hillsides in Ireland, naturalizing in woodland edges across the eastern United States, and then you see it in the most carefully designed formal gardens in the world. It belongs everywhere. And hummingbirds have known this far longer than gardeners have. The flowers are large, pendulous, and deeply tubular. One of the most architecturally perfect hummingbird flower shapes that exists. The interior of each bloom is often spotted or freckled with contrasting colors. And while that patterning is primarily thought to guide bees, it seems to do nothing to discourage hummingbirds, who push their entire heads inside those large bells to access the nectar pool at the base. Foxglove blooms in late spring to early summer on tall, dramatic spires, sometimes reaching 5 or 6 feet in height. And the sheer size of the flowers means each visit delivers a substantial nectar reward. Hummingbirds aren't making a lot of small stops here. They're making productive, high-yield visits. Technically, foxglove is biennial. It completes its life cycle over 2 years, but it self-seeds so reliably that in most gardens it behaves like a perennial, with new plants appearing every year to replace the ones that have bloomed and set seed. Plant a good initial drift, let it self-seed freely, and you'll have foxgloves in that spot essentially forever. One important note: all parts of foxglove are toxic if ingested. Keep that in mind if you have young children or pets who spend time in the garden. For the hummingbirds, it's completely safe. For humans and animals, handle with care. Number 4. Cardinal flower, Lobelia cardinalis. We have officially entered the elite tier of this countdown. And cardinal flower belongs here without any argument. If you were going to design a flower specifically and exclusively for hummingbirds, optimized from the ground up for their feeding behavior, their visual preferences, their bill shape, you would design something that looks almost exactly like Lobelia cardinalis. The flowers are an almost impossibly vivid scarlet red. Not orange red. Not coral. True, saturated, burning scarlet. One of the most powerful colors in the hummingbird's visual spectrum. The bloom structure is perfectly tubular and oriented in a way that positions the nectar reward precisely where a hovering hummingbird's bill will naturally reach it. The nectar production is generous and consistent, and the bloom period runs from midsummer right into early fall. Perfectly timed with the late season when hummingbirds are feeding intensively to prepare for southward migration. Cardinal flower is also a North American native, which means it has co-evolved with ruby-throated hummingbirds over millions of years. This isn't a plant that hummingbirds learned to like. This is a plant that grew up alongside them. The relationship is written into the biology of both species. It prefers consistently moist soil and partial shade. Think stream banks, pond edges, the shadier sections of a rain garden. It will grow in full sun if moisture is consistent, but it struggles in hot, dry conditions. Give it what it wants, moisture and some afternoon shade, and it will absolutely deliver. If you only plant one new perennial for hummingbirds this season, cardinal flower has an argument for being that plant. Hold that thought though, because numbers 3 through 1 are going to complicate that decision. Number 3, Bee Balm Monarda. There is a moment that happens in mid to late summer in gardens that grow bee balm. A moment that people who have witnessed it never forget. The plant reaches full bloom. Those wild, almost shaggy-looking flower heads open up in shades of red, pink, lavender, or white, each one a tightly packed cluster of tubular florets radiating outward like a firework frozen in place. And then, sometimes seemingly all at once, the hummingbirds arrive. Not one, multiple. Because bee balm produces so much nectar, so consistently, over such a long bloom period, it doesn't just attract individual hummingbirds. It attracts competing hummingbirds. If you've ever watched 2 ruby-throated hummingbirds in an aerial dispute over a bee balm plant, those high-speed chase sequences, the diving and pivoting, the aggressive chittering, you already know what I'm talking about. If you haven't, planting bee balm is your fastest route to that experience. Monarda is native to eastern North America and has been used by indigenous peoples for centuries, both medicinally and as a culinary herb. The leaves are fragrant, with a strong oregano citrus character, and that fragrance carries on the breeze in a way that seems to signal the surrounding ecosystem that something good is happening here. It spreads by rhizome, so give it space or be prepared to divide it every couple of years. It can be susceptible to powdery mildew in humid conditions. Choose mildew-resistant varieties like Jacob Klein or raspberry wine if this is a concern in your climate. Full sun to partial shade, consistently moist soil, zones 3 through 9. Plant it in a generous drift, not a single plant, not 3 plants. A drift. Let it establish and spread over a couple of seasons. And then stand back and watch your garden become something that other gardeners drive past slowly with their windows down. I have to stop here for a moment, because we're about to get to numbers 2 and 1. And these are the plants that genuinely separate gardens that hummingbirds return to year after year from gardens that get skipped entirely. And I want you to have this information. I genuinely do. But here's what keeps me up sometimes. There are people watching this video right now who won't subscribe, who'll watch this, maybe plant 1 or 2 things, and then never come back. And next year, when migration season starts again, they'll have a garden that's almost there, but not quite. Missing that one piece of information they would have gotten if they'd stayed connected. Please don't be that person. Subscribe right now. Hit the notification bell. Because what's coming in numbers 2 and 1, and what comes in every video on this channel, is the kind of information that quietly, permanently changes how your garden functions. Not just for you. For every bird that flies over your neighborhood and decides whether it's worth stopping. Your garden can be a sanctuary, or it can be a gap in the map. The difference, most of the time, is information. So stay connected. We're almost there. Number 2, Trumpet Vine, Campsis radicans. Trumpet vine is not a plant for the timid gardener. Let me just say that up front. This is a plant with ambition. Left to its own devices, it will climb, spread, send up suckers from the roots, and generally attempt to cover any vertical surface within reach. It has been called invasive in some regions. It requires management. It demands respect. And hummingbirds are absolutely obsessed with it. The flowers are large, genuinely large, significantly bigger than most other blooms on this list. And they are shaped in that classic trumpet form that gives the plant its name. Deep saturated orange-red, they produce enormous volumes of nectar, and they bloom from midsummer right through into early fall. A mature trumpet vine in full bloom is not subtle. It is a blazing, cascading hummingbird magnet spectacle that can cover an entire fence, arbor, or trellis in a wash of orange. Because the individual flowers are so large, the nectar reward per visit is exceptional. Hummingbirds aren't making dozens of quick stops, they're hovering at individual blooms for extended feeding sessions. A well-established trumpet vine can support multiple hummingbirds feeding simultaneously without any single bird going hungry. Plant it where it has something to climb and where you're comfortable with it spreading, a strong trellis, a chain-link fence, an old tree stump you want covered. Keep it away from your house foundation and gutters. Prune it hard every winter to keep it in bounds. And then let it do what it does. In terms of raw nectar volume and hummingbird traffic, almost nothing beats a mature trumpet vine. Which is why it sits at number 2. Almost nothing. Number 1, Salvia granitica, black and blue, and the native salvia ecosystem ***. Here's the thing about the number 1 spot on this list. It's not really about a single plant. It's about a strategy, a way of thinking about your garden, that changes everything. Salvia granitica black and blue is, by nearly every measurable standard, the most powerful hummingbird perennial you can grow in most North American gardens. The color, that electric, almost unreal cobalt blue against those near-black calyces, is extraordinary. The bloom period runs from early summer through hard frost. The nectar production is exceptional. The tubular flower structure is precise. And hummingbirds, when they find a planting of black and blue salvia in full bloom, behave differently than they do at almost any other plant. They don't just visit. They linger. They come back. They bring the next generation. But here's what elevates it from great plant to number 1. It anchors an ecosystem. When you build a garden around black and blue salvia as the centerpiece, and you layer in the other plants from this countdown, the penstemon for late spring, the bee balm for midsummer, the cardinal flower for late summer, the trumpet vine for sheer volume, you're not just creating a plant list. You're engineering a continuous, overlapping, season-long nectar corridor that hummingbirds can rely on from the moment they arrive in spring to the moment they leave in fall. And that reliability, that consistency of your garden as a resource, is what gets it written into migration memory. That's what turns a nice garden into a legendary one. The hummingbirds don't just visit. They map it. They remember it. They return to it across years and across generations. The research on this is genuinely moving when you sit with it. Individual hummingbirds have been documented returning to the same garden, the same specific plants, for up to 9 consecutive years. 9 years. That bird has been navigating thousands of miles of continent, and your garden is a landmark it trusts. That is what we're building toward. Not just a pretty flower bed. A landmark. So here they are. All 13. Catmint and agastache to welcome the early arrivals. Lupin and penstemon to anchor the spring. Coral bells for the shaded corners. Crocosmia and Nymphophea to bridge the midsummer gap. Foxglove for drama and volume. Cardinal flower and bee balm for that late summer intensity. Trumpet vine for sheer spectacle. And black and blue salvia to tie it all together across the full season. You don't need all 13. You probably don't have space for all 13. But the more of these you plant, the more you layer them, the more you think about bloom timing and nectar density, and the specific windows when migrating birds are arriving or departing, the more your garden shifts from a passive space into an active one, into a place that matters. Here's what I want to leave you with. Hummingbird populations across North America are under real pressure. Habitat fragmentation, climate-driven shifts in bloom timing, loss of native plant communities. These things are measurable and they're ongoing. Individual backyard gardens cannot solve these problems alone. But collectively, thousands of gardens that have been deliberately designed as hummingbird resources, that's a corridor. That's a network. That's something real. Your garden is part of that network whether you intend it to be or not. The question is whether it's a productive part or a gap. You now have the information to make it productive. The plants, the timing, the strategy. It's all here. If this video helped you, if even one plant on this list is going on your order list or your next nursery run, I want to ask you something honestly. Is this channel in your subscriptions right now? Because if it's not, I need you to understand what that means. It means the next video, which might be the one that solves the exact problem your specific garden is struggling with, will come out and you won't know. You'll miss it. And your garden will go another season without that piece. These hummingbirds are counting on people who care. They can't advocate for themselves. They can't tell you what they need. They just come back every spring, tired and hungry, hoping that the gardens they remember are still there waiting for them. Be one of the gardens they can count on. Subscribe. Turn on notifications. Share this video with one person, one gardener in your life, who needs to see it. And drop a comment below telling me which plant surprised you most. I read every single one. Thank you for spending this time with Evergreen Garden Life. The hummingbirds are already on their way. Make sure your garden is ready.